and then pass it over to Corey. Welcome, everyone. Sorry if you have heard this so many times, but if you've just joined us, please add your first and last name in the chat so we can get you for AIA credits. Welcome to our first session of 2025. This is put on by the AIA Colorado Committee on the Environment. We have such a fantastic large committee this year. They're so excited to put on an educational series for all of you. And this first one, we're excited to have Corey Squire join us today. If you haven't had a chance to read his book, People, Planet, Design, it is available as an ebook and then also as a hard copy. Highly recommend it, and you might be very intrigued to go out and buy it yourself after this presentation. We have several great presentations lined up for the rest of the year, starting with today's and then rolling out one every month until June. So in April, we have one that's going to be focusing on passive house and passive house systems and multifamily. That's April 17th. Another one focusing on embodied carbon and whole building life cycle analyses on May 14th. And another one focusing on building materials and healthy building materials. And that will be June 11th. Date's a little bit tentative, but keep an eye out for that. We'll be posting that soon. So to introduce our speaker, Corey Squire, he is an associate principal and sustainability director at Bora Architects. He is also a principal consultant with Department of Sustainability, and he wrote the book that will be the topic of the presentation today, People, Planet, Design. Corey, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I will pass it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Marisol. Let me get the slides set up. All right, can everyone see my slides? I'll take that as a yes. So
got it. Yep.
So my name is Corey Squire, and today we're going to talk about practice transformation within the kind of architectural practice. So I'm going to start off with a question like, do you want to excel in sustainability? And you don't actually have to answer that. The assumption is that a lot of people do. And then another question, like, do you believe in good design? And do these two things have anything to do with each other? And my hope is that over the course of this presentation, that connection between good design and sustainable design, high performance, will become evident. So quick introduction, as Marisol mentioned, the Sustainability Director at Bora Architecture Interiors in Portland, Oregon. It's a firm that's about 70 years old. We have about 75 architects on staff, and we do architecture, interiors, and experiential design. And everything that we do is through this lens of climate, health, and equity, right? This is the kind of purpose of our practice. This is what we see as kind of how architecture can contribute to the public realm. And this is the lens through which we make every design decision. But it wasn't always this way, right? While the firm had a strong environmental ethos from its founding, here's the Bora Beach House, which is a kind of a house that we designed for ourselves back in the 90s to kind of reconnect and kind of get more inspired by nature. The firm still designed buildings like this up until about 2018. So I joined the firm about 3 years ago as sustainability director, and fundamentally what that means to me is that I change culture, right? That's what sustainability is all about. Sustainability is not a fight, right? Often this is seen as like, how can we like convince our clients to do this thing, right? Sustainability is not about chasing after a project with a pooper scooper, trying to clean up messes that design teams have made. Fundamentally, sustainability exists at the level of practice. And I think if you take one message away from today's talk, this is it. You can't address sustainability on a project-by-project basis. It just doesn't work. And I'll give an example for this. So here's a graph that's going to show a typical firm's portfolio. We have projects along the horizontal axis, and we have some measure of performance. Maybe that's energy, maybe that's health, maybe that's embodied carbon, whatever it is, some measure of performance. along the vertical axis. And most projects are going to perform fairly typically, right? This could be social norms, this could be code minimum, whatever it is. And then a firm will typically have a sustainable project, right? That's the one project that kind of people are excited about that pushes the boundary in some interesting way, right? Maybe this is the Bullitt Center in Seattle, or maybe this is Rocky Mountain Institute by all of you. Bora had one of these projects as well. This was Creekside High School is our first net zero energy educational project. But the thing about the special sustainability project is there's always a reason that sets it apart, right? Like maybe the client founded Earth Day or something like that. But what really matters is what happens on all the other projects. So a way of thinking about sustainability is we want to kind of invert this model.
And it was never, so it was like, had like 2 inches in between and it was supposed to know that.
Oh, if you wouldn't mind muting, if you could, that'd be great. Thank you.
So to invert this model into this model, right? Because this is what sustainability looks like. So how do we get there? How do we shift sustainability from something that's reserved for like that one special project in the office to just how we do things? So I'll back up a little bit. I'll share a little bit about my personal journey, thinking about these ideas and kind of leading up to my book and the way that I imagine sustainability fits into practice today. So this is a picture of me on my first day, on my first job as an architect. The firm had just completed this 400 unit multifamily project, and my assignment was to read all of the electrical meters. And kind of once a month, I would go floor by floor and record all of the electrical meters on a spreadsheet. And this was kind of a really interesting introduction to the profession for me, because we talk about sustainability, we talk about energy modeling, we talk about high performance strategies, but nothing really matters unless it's measurable, unless it ends up in the electrical meter. So I took this approach to high performance design and evidence-based design, and really post-occupancy and measurability to Lake Flato, where I spent a good number of years as the sustainability manager. Here's a Living Building Challenge project that we designed. And what I love about this picture is the water treatment kind of facility. The thing that makes the project actually work is out front, and it's actually part of the design rather than being kind of buried away somewhere. So in 2018, I was selected to serve on the National Committee on the Environment. This is that group. We're having a little impromptu demonstration in front of the White House about kind of the ability of architects to solve problems that we face. And sustainability was considered important, right? It was always important, but at that time, architects or the AIA was not really seen as a leader in sustainability. There was the 2030 Challenge, which is really great. But besides that, the USGBC LEED is often what came to mind for people when they thought about sustainability. So our group, the Committee on the Environment at that time, wanted to do something about this. We wanted to make sustainability more relevant to everyday practice. And we had been managing the Code Top 10 Awards program since the early 90s. And it was based on these 10 measures of sustainable design. They were called the Code Top 10 Measures of Sustainable Design. And then we thought, what if we took this list and rebranded it? So it wasn't just the Code Top 10 Measures of Sustainable Design, but it was the AIA Framework for Sustainable Design. We wanted to broaden what historically has been criteria for one award into kind of a formal definition of what sustainable design is for the profession. But then we thought we could take it a step further. And rather than calling it the Framework for Sustainable Design, we called this thing the AIA Framework for Design Excellence. Not only was it now defining what sustainable design is, but it's really defining what good design is. And this was a kind of a major moment. We wrote up a resolution that we brought to the floor of the AIA convention in 2019, that among other things called for a transformation of day-to-day practice by adopting the Framework for Design Excellence. And then this resolution passed overwhelmingly. We've had 93% of the delegates voting in favor. And this is what it is today, right? It's the Framework for Design Excellence lives on the AIA website. It's a series of kind of focus areas: design for equitable communities, design for ecosystems, design for water. And each of these has a list of best practices, how to actually design in line with this. The Framework for Design Excellence is made into awards programs, local, national, and it's criteria through which even the FAIA award is considered. So it's had this big influence since it was adopted in 2019. So around this time, I left kind of data like traditional architectural practice, and I started my own consulting firm. It's called Department of Sustainability. And I worked with firms across the country around how to improve the performance of their portfolios. And that allowed me to kind of explore this question that I've always been curious about. Why do some projects perform better than others? Or even taking a step back, why do some practices perform better than others? Why is it that some practices will consistently put out high-performing projects, while others will really struggle to do anything that's more interesting than the norm? And the conclusion that I came to is that in order for a practice to excel, you really need two things. You need the right knowledge and you need the right culture. Lots of firms have one, but not the other, right? If you have the right knowledge, but not the right culture to use it, you'll know exactly what you need to do to improve project performance, but you won't have the opportunity to do it. Maybe the firm is just interested in something else. If you have the right culture and you're like all gung-ho about high performance design, but you really just don't know where to start, that could be a problem as well. I also realized that there was a gap in the literature. There's lots of resources and books out there that describe high performance design strategies. Some are better than others. Many of them are not that good at all or outdated. But there's really nothing that combine this, what to do with how to do it. So this is the book that I wrote. The idea is this is a practical guide that tells you what design strategies will consistently result in high performance projects, but also how to implement those design strategies within the context of modern architectural practice. Fundamentally, the book is about design, right? I kind of eliminate the word sustainable entirely. I actually don't use the word sustainable in the book. I have a note in the preface about the fact that I won't use the word sustainable. Because that's not the point. The point is not to create and define a subset of architectural practice. It's to transform architectural practice towards better outcomes that benefit everyone. And the book is based on a few key premises, right? One is that good design solves problems. If it's not solving a problem, or even if it's exacerbating existing problems, we probably can't call it good design. It's based on the premise that we have all the knowledge and technology we already need. We don't need to wait for nuclear fusion to be invented to solve the climate crisis, right? 100, 200 years ago, we were designing and building in a way that was not kind of risking the global ecosystem. And it would not be surprising if 100 or 200 years in the future, we're basically have a society powered by solar and wind. It's based on the premise that the constraints are not what they seem, right? When I talk to people challenged with high performance design, they often say the client's not interested or we don't have the budget. And I don't think either of those things are relevant. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And it's based on the premise that the environment influences outcomes. So this could be the physical environment in which, like an office environment where design takes place, but it's really the social, cultural environment. What's considered okay, what's considered acceptable, what's considered good, that defines what people do. So at the same time, the barriers to better design are real. There's the barrier of complexity, right? Over time, architectural design has gotten increasingly complex, where more and more requirements are added onto it. And sustainability or climate or health or equity could just feel like additional constraints that are piled on top of an already complicated process without any more time or budget to consider all these important topics. There's a barrier of prioritization. So if you look at something like a LEED checklist, you might get a few points for energy. You might get points for water conservation. But the window-wall ratio of a project really drives performance in so many different areas. It is like orders of magnitude more important than something like low flow fixtures, which is just about purchasing something. There's a barrier of distraction, right? There's lots of companies out there that manufacture tools that try to get you to purchase them and they say that they'll solve all your problems, but a product is not what we need to address practice transformation, to address high performance design. It's really a vision, right? We have to be clear about the purpose underneath what we're trying to do. And then purpose itself is a barrier, right? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? Are we trying to complete a checklist, or are we trying to promote human thriving? So at the same time, we know what the barriers are not. We know cost is not the barrier, because so often clients who say that they can't afford the sustainable high performance solution will spend all sorts of money on expensive finishes or additional space that maybe they didn't need. We know that design is not a barrier. There's plenty of examples of beautiful high performing projects, just as there are plenty of examples of ugly, poor performing projects. And we know that interest is not a barrier, right? So I've worked with hundreds of project teams on different scales, different regions. And it's not at all clear to me that people who understand climate change or care more deeply about the environment produce better buildings, right? There's no correlation between project performance and a personal commitment. There's no correlation between project performance and just like love of being outside or whatever else. So what we need for our practice, for our profession, is this holistic approach of how we can kind of think through the appropriate design strategies and then actually implement them onto projects. So here's how my book is laid out. Step one, when kind of organizing this, was to define the right outcomes, right? In addition to like on time and on budget, fulfilling the client's requirements, it's really important that projects promote human health, social equity, carbon reduction, and a thriving ecosystem. Step number two is to trace those outcomes back to building systems, right? We don't get to solve these issues any way we want. We get to solve these issues by designing specific building systems in specific ways. Step number three was to align an individual outcome and a building system with a effective strategy. So if you want carbon reduction and the building system that you're applying is the window, then the facade organization is going to be the strategy to get there. And then step four was to create an environment that makes it all happen, right? So zooming out, this is really about the culture of the practice, right? Shared mission and vision, access to knowledge, effective communication, good incentives, safety through social belonging, and then a practice that lives and practices their stated values. This is the right knowledge and the right culture, right? This is the combination of those two things that allow a firm to effortlessly and consistently put out high performance projects. So this was the precedent for my book. I don't know if any of you read this. It's a cookbook, but rather than just having a list of recipes, it really tries to get to the kind of the underlying premise, the elements, as it says, of good cooking, right? So if you add more salt to your lentils, they'll taste better. Similarly, if you have an appropriate window wall ratio, you'll have good daylight. And then similar to that book, kind of my book is kind of sprinkled with illustrations that kind of, with the goal of kind of breaking down complex topics and making important, challenging ideas easy to communicate. So this one, sources of indoor pollution, thinking about parking space in relation to an urban core, the difference between a skin-dominated building and a load-dominated building. But fundamentally, the book is a roadmap for practice transformation. So I developed a process for kind of working with firms to improve their performance across the board. And I call it the elements of a high performance practice. And it can be broken down into having a vision, culture, process, resource strategies, but there's really three major steps, right? The first one is just having a clear idea of what you want to achieve. What is sustainable design? And this kind of gets back to the question that I asked at the beginning. I think it's fairly clear that good design equals sustainable design. And an easy way of proving that is just by looking the opposite, right? A design that causes human harm, you would call a bad design. For instance, if every time you picked up your cell phone, if it gave you an electric shock or if it burst into flames, like you would call that a bad design. Often architecture is thought of through this idea of form and function. And what happened, kind of the reason that we're facing these issues that we are today, is the schism, and I talk about this in the book, the schism that kind of developed between form and function over the past 100 years. So I'll kind of just walk through this, and this kind of helps set the stage of kind of good design equaling sustainable design. So 100 years ago, there was no such thing as sustainable design, right? There was every building was designed in a way that allowed it to function. So here's an aerial view of Toledo, Spain. Every room that you can see here has access to the outdoors, has windows, because that's the only way they could be daylit, right? The buildings are close together so that pedestrians can walk between them and get from one place to another. Likewise, if you wanted a daylit space, you needed large windows, right? This is Penn Station in New York. It's a large volume, and it needs to have large windows accordingly, because that's the only way that you can daylight, the only way you can light at all such a large space. But this connection between form and function really kind of disappeared with the introduction of fossil fuels. Right? Suddenly, we didn't need windows to provide light. So floor plates got broader, ceilings came down, people were pulled away from the exterior because we could just solve the problem with electrical lighting. Likewise, gasoline could now be used to move people across cities. We didn't need to walk. We didn't need to use streetcars or whatever. So cities spread out, and it kind of eliminated movement and social connection from our everyday lives. So in the past, when building form had to reflect its function because that was the only way that it was able to design, cheap energy free design from physical constraints. We can now do whatever we want because the function can be covered by oil. But the question is, what did we gain by doing this? Right, we gained the ability to thoughtlessly scribble on a napkin and call it design, while carbon emissions were covering the function that used to be covered by design work. But without function, right, if we have no reason behind the forms that we're making, we lose touch with meaning. And the function is the people part, right? That's actually what provides a quality environment and benefit to the people that buildings are supposed to be serving. So in my book, I kind of create this spectrum from pure form to pure function, with form and function being in the middle. So pure form is something like art, right? It's beautiful to look at, but doesn't serve any practical purpose. And then I use a traffic cone as an example of pure function, right? Nobody loves a traffic cone. Everything about it is just kind of necessary to make it work, right? It's bright colors so cars can see it. It's light so that you can carry it and transport it. You can stack it. It stands up on its own. And then the combination of form and function, I use the example of a bicycle, but a building would fit here as well, right? So a bicycle is a beautiful form, but it's also the only form that would allow it to work, right? There's nothing auxiliary to a bicycle. There's these two wheels, there's a chain, there's a frame to hold it together, there's a place to sit, there's a way of powering it, there's a system for stopping. And what's really interesting about a bicycle is if you change the function, the form will change. So let's say that you want the bicycle to go really fast, right? The form will adjust accordingly. It's now super smooth and aerodynamic, right? The position of the seat changes to get you in a more aggressive kind of posture. The back wheels is now filled in to limit wind resistance. And what's beautiful about this form is the fact that it's kind of crafted for function. So let's say the function is different. Let's say you want to move kids around, right? The form will change accordingly. And this is also a completely functional, completely functional artifact for kind of accomplishing this goal. But there's no function that would necessitate this bicycle, right? Bicycles don't have square wheels, and the reason is because they don't work. And there's no scenario where they would work. So what the square wheel bicycle represents is the western facing curtain wall, right? It's the cantilever, which uses unnecessary energy. It's the highway that inefficiently moves people, probably very slowly, between cities. So at the same time, another schism kind of developed, and not just between form and function, but between design and sustainability. Again, before the fossil fuel era, there was no such thing as a sustainable building because all buildings had to function, had to develop a form that allowed them to function, right? So this is a warehouse from the early 20th century. All the wood was locally harvested. There's openings in the wall. There's windows to allow light in. But then around 1970, when the environmental movement became kind of relevant and people started thinking about sustainability, there was an overreaction, and architects started designing this stuff, right? This is not a historic form. This is not a kind of reference to form following function, as it had always worked for hundreds of years. Kind of this is weird and esoteric, and created this idea that sustainability and design were two different things, and you had to choose one or the other. And that led to the modern day, right? Where we have kind of examples of quote unquote sustainable projects, and it doesn't really matter how they look. And then we have examples of design projects where it doesn't really matter how it performs. But good design excellence, it really needs to do it all. Otherwise, why would we call it good design? So after we're clear about what it is we want to achieve within a practice, the second step is to establish a firm culture that serves as a headwind rather than serves as a tailwind rather than a headwind. So here's a design principal at a pinup, and she's reviewing work. And what is it that she's thinking? What is it that she's pointing out, right? Does she ask how the design addresses air quality? Does she ask how the project improves the lives of the people who live nearby? Does she ask if the design reduces carbon emissions? Or does she just focus on the exterior appearance, right? And the signals that she sends during that pinup and in her communication to the staff is going to establish the values that of the practice and will send people off working on one thing or another thing, right? Fundamentally, culture in a practice comes from their leadership, right? And over here, I have examples of like very different corporate leaders, and we all know about the cultures of the companies that they created. So establishing a culture that allows sustainability to thrive, it's a real commitment. It takes time. We have to ensure that we are not just saying the right thing, but also signaling the right thing, living the values that we want to achieve. Now, so often cost is what comes up as the barrier. Why we can't do this because it costs too much. But in reality, cost is just a manifestation of priorities, and priorities are a manifestation of values and knowledge. And we can change values and knowledge. At the very least, we can change knowledge, which in tune would change priorities and change the cost of a project. So sustainable design is not about taking a typical project and adding stuff to it that costs more. It's rethinking what it is we want to achieve, what the ultimate goal is. Is the goal climate, health, and equity, or is the goal something cool, right? And if you think about one of those two things, your priorities will be different. The final product will cost different. So the final step is to prioritize simple and effective design strategies, and then repeatedly use what we know to work. So again, there are companies out there that want to make this seem really complicated. They want to sell you tools, usually software simulation tools, and they say this is the only way to do it. But in reality, it's not that complicated, right? When it's hot, we need to keep the sun out. And if we do that, our loads will decrease. And if we do that, the energy use will decrease. The building will become more resilient. Probably the daylight will improve. People will be more comfortable. So I'll end with a quick case study. This is the Holgate Library in Portland, Oregon. It opened maybe 6 months ago or so. And it was the first project that Bora started designing with since I joined as sustainability director. So it's a really nice kind of design process that we went through to achieve this. We started with a goal setting exercise. And again, at the beginning of a project, it's really important to know what it is you're trying to achieve. We benchmarked other libraries We were very clear about kind of what was possible, how this library could perform to other libraries, and what it is we needed to get to. So we set a goal of an EUI of 17.1, based on some early benchmarking studies. And then we got started with our massing. So the site was oriented north-south, but we still were able to put in an east-west oriented building. We went with option C out of these three. It was the only east-west option that would fit on the site. And then what we did was, rather than having a core in the center, we split up the core and we moved it to the eastern and western facade. So that way we can have windows in the north and south where we have quality daylight. And we had solid building elements on the east and west where we wanted to prevent low angle harsh light and heat gain. Now, because the site was a little bit constrained, the building ended up being deeper than would have been ideal for daylight. So we're able to put in a skylight in the middle, and we were able to confirm the skylight's performance with some simulation. In addition, we got FSC certified mass timber structure. We got a hydronic radiant system, which runs through the floor slab, which we were only able to do because the load was so low because of the orientation and because of the minimum western glazing. And we got operable windows, which was kind of counter to the county standards for resilience. So that if the power goes out in the summer, or if there's another pandemic, the windows could be open and the building could still be functional, occupiable. We also engaged the community throughout this process. We even offered them 3 options of exterior color. There was a blue option, a green option, and a pink option, and we had a public vote. And green won the day, and we ended up going in that direction. This allowed the community to kind of feel real connection to their library. And then here are some pictures of that interior skylight, which brings light to the center of the space. Here's that green, kind of goes throughout in the children's area. You can see there's some felt wrapped lighting fixtures. This allowed the acoustics to be controlled while not covering up the wood structure. And then we've done extensive measurement and verification on this project. So here's me spending a day working at the library with my air quality monitor. That 100 on the monitor is 100 out of 100 kind of air quality metric. All right, we had low CO2, we had low particulates, we had low chemicals. And I took this measurement on a day that we actually had wildfire smoke in the city of Portland, just to show how effective that ventilation and filtration system was. So the project really could promote health and serve as a refuge during a wildfire event. So that's it. That's the process for practice transformation. Kind of define sustainability very clearly, define where you want to get, create a culture that allows that process to thrive, and then utilize those effective strategies that we all know, that we've all learned in like intro systems class in architecture school, to every project, like confidently. And we can get consistent high performance projects. So I'll end with this is a quote from the forward of my book. So I didn't write this, but it kind of gets to the point of the difference between scarcity and abundance when we think about sustainability. So the transition from today's destructive ways of living to something better has often been framed as self-denial, right? What are we willing to give up? And you'll hear this question over and over again, right? We want to do a sustainable project. It's not practical. It's too expensive. We have to do something else. But instead, this book asks, what are we willing to gain, right? Would you be willing to have buildings be more joyful, more beautiful, more comfortable? Would you be willing to pay less on utilities? Would you be willing to spend time in buildings that help you move and be healthier, in communities where everything you need is close by, where everyone felt welcome? So I think that we can kind of flip the script. And sustainability is not something that requires sacrifice, but it's something that gives us everything that we want. So quick plug for the book before we finish up. There's a lot of, I'm touching the surface of kind of some of these concepts in the book, but there's a lot of depth there. And if you're interested in this topic at all, I highly recommend you get a copy and check it out. There's even a coupon code. If you go to Island Press as the publisher, if you go to their website and put in PPD, you can get 25% off. And that's it. I'd love to spend a little time taking some questions from the audience and maybe have a little discussion.
That was a fantastic presentation, Corey. Thank you. No, I was furiously taking notes. Um,
I can give you the
yeah,
slides, Marisol.
yeah, they'd be useful. Had a lot of conversations about this. Yeah, we wanted to open it up to Q&A for the group if anyone has questions for Corey. And I believe there is also a virtual version of your book as well available.
Yeah, you can get the ebook. The ebook
Yeah,
might even be on sale on Amazon.
I
The
saw there was
publisher
a
said something
sale.
about this, so take a look.
Yeah. Feel free to add your questions to the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask them live if you want. I think I can.
Sorry, I've got a question.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Hey, Tom.
wonderful book. Yeah, wonderful book, Corey.
Thank
I've
you.
read it. And one thing I grapple with, I just want your perspective in kind of changing the minds of architects towards this better practices. I continually get this excuse that, the client, the client doesn't ask for it, or that, it's sort of like in the client's preview, it's their call whether we go sustainable or not. And it seems like it's sort of like holding all these architects back. But
Yeah,
any
and what I
thoughts
would
on
say is like, does the client ask for waterproofing? Right?
that?
Like, what if you didn't flash your building, right? What if instead of having a roof that sloped away from the building, you sloped towards the center of the building? The client never explicitly asks for almost everything that they want because it's assumed. So they might not ask for resilience, but when the power goes out, their expectation is the building performs, right? They might not explicitly ask for health, but if they get sick from the off-gassing of toxic chemicals in their building, they will not be happy about that. We need to stop thinking about sustainability as an added thing, and we need to start thinking about as baseline, like standard of care, an appropriate response to the question at hand. And we need to stop waiting to be invited to talk about what we think is important, right? We have the opportunity to, number one, share with the client what we think is important, but number two, just design in a way that is kind of in line with modern norms and expectations around what a building should do. So my message is like stop waiting for an invitation. Let's design in the way that we think is right, and let's be confident in our explanation about why we think it's the right way to design. And a lot of my book is about communication, because I think that is kind of the missing link. It's like a lot of people know the right way to design, but don't necessarily have the experience or tools to make the case effectively. And I think that's the skill set we can all practice.
Yeah, thank you for that.
We have a couple questions in the chat that are similar. How long did it take to build a culture in your firm to realize these efforts? And to please elaborate how we could change a firm's culture. If you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so cultural change can take a long time, or it could take a short time, depending on like the appetite and desire to have things change. So at my practice, like when I joined, they were like, when I showed the culture, the matrix being culture knowledge, like they had all the right culture. They were like, we want to do this. They just didn't know exactly what to do. So it was fairly easy or straightforward for me to come in and be like, let's just direct this effort in this direction or that direction so we get the outcomes that we want. But fundamentally, like I mentioned, like culture comes from leadership, and leadership has to be on board for any sort of cultural transformation to happen. A lot of my clients, when I consult, had come to me because, let's say they were in an interview and they didn't talk about sustainability or high performance or health or any of these things, and the firm that beat them really did. And then they realized that they might be missing opportunities or behind the times. And that has been kind of an impetus to change quickly, right? To really catch up. So sometimes there's like this trigger event that leads to it. But in a large practice where there's not kind of perfect unity, it does take a long time. And I think that you just have to be consistent. And I think that this is the right approach. And I think that people will be convinced about that as they see it in action. So you almost just have to kind of go over and over again, like, what are we trying to achieve? How are the strategies for achieving it? These are the design choices that we know will work. Um, and then just wait for the outcomes to kind of reinforce that. But that's definitely a longer process than the firm that like has a need to change quickly.
Absolutely. Zach was just giving a great plug, great presentation, and every architect needs to read the book. Laura asked if there's going to be a recording of this. We have been recording the presentation and we'll share it to our AIA Colorado YouTube channel. So that'll be on there. She said she also loved the book and especially the cartoons. And I believe someone very close to you, Corey, did the cartoons.
Yeah, so Elena Zambrano, my wife, was the illustrator in the book, so I'll give her a quick shout out. Yeah, it was a fun process to work together. And she would read my first draft of a chapter and identify the areas that she thought would be better explained through an illustration, and then she would draw it. So that was fun and that worked out really well.
Very sweet. I think if anyone has any other questions that they'd like to ask, I think we got through. Oh, there's one in the chat. What trends or innovations in sustainable architecture excite you the most right now?
No, it's a good question. I would say, I mean, what excites me is just this concept of the framework for design excellence, that has been increasingly kind of relevant and like front and center in the architecture movement. I'm not excited about new technology. I don't think that we need new technology, with the exception of maybe a kind of slow and persistent reduction in the cost of heat pumps, and better performance on heat pumps. I think that that'll be great and that'll all work out well. But what I'm really excited is when I see kind of this conflation of design sustainability as a single thing, and when I stop seeing sustainability as this other thing that goes over there, that's what I'm getting excited about. And I'm seeing it more and more, especially as it appears in award submissions. So it's more of a social innovation than a technological innovation.
Yeah, yeah, getting to the people and talking, especially at the leadership level, as you mentioned. Another question, how much does energy modeling and predicted models affect your design process? What kind of energy modeling tools do you use?
Yeah, so I think energy modeling is an important tool, but it's a tool that is used to take a good design and turn it into a great design, right? It's all about improving at the margins. Energy modeling alone won't take a mediocre building and make it into a good building or a great building. That's what our kind of best practices are for. So the way that we work in my office is, we design early on with best practices. We get our orientation right. We get our window wall ratio right. We get our structural system right. We understand our enclosure. And then maybe in late SD is when we'll introduce energy modeling, to fine tune things. I think that daylight modeling is probably more important. So I like to do daylight modeling during early SD. And then energy modeling, we want to see if the performance of the building is matching our expectations and if there are things that we could do to fine tune it further. I'm always concerned about practices that just depend too much on energy modeling and think energy modeling is going to solve problems for them. It's really not the purpose of that technology. It's all about fine-tuning an already good design. And the good design is going to come from the architect who understands the best practices and designs with the right goals in mind.
And then what
But the software I
different
use is called Climate
software, yeah.
Studio.
Do you use that for both thermal and daylighting?
Yeah, Climate Studio, you can do daylight, you can do energy, you can do all sorts of different, you can do temperature, performance, so all sorts of different stuff. But I do like to keep I like to keep tools very tight, right? I like one tool to do one thing, and I don't spend any time exploring or researching new tools, just because again, it's like the icing on the cake. It's not that important as the kind of overall process.
And can you use any of the outputs from Climate Studio for any permitting data or anything that you might need to submit for a project?
Probably not. So typically energy models for compliance or energy models for lead or anything like that, it's just a completely different animal than energy models for the purpose of improving design decisions. So it's just better to have those two things completely separate. You're not gonna be able to effectively use one for the other.
Yeah. Another question, any thoughts on where the IBC/IECC are moving toward performance versus prescriptive?
Well, I mean, I don't think they're moving towards either performance or prescriptive. I think a performance and prescriptive path will continue to both be available. It is very clear that they're moving towards passive house, which is pretty exciting to me. So if you think about there's different kind of what we call like high performance building certification systems out there. There's like LEED, Living Building Challenge. Like it is not moving toward LEED or Living Building Challenge. It's moving towards passive house because if you were to, there's a great quote that I saw, but if you were to like use data and evidence to identify like what the best possible building is that meets all the criteria we want, it's basically passive house. You get the thermal comfort benefit, you get the indoor air quality benefit, you get the energy reduction benefit, and it's really just this fairly simple process of emphasizing the passive system, the enclosure, over the mechanical system. So that you spend more money on the enclosure and you spend less money on the mechanical system. You should save money overall. So I think that the codes are going to head in that direction. I think they're already starting to. And I wouldn't be surprised if one day in the future, there's only one code and building performance certification system, and it's just passive house. It seems to be the most effective in a variety of different ways, especially in your climate, especially in Colorado.
Absolutely. And I think it hits on your point of prioritization. If we're modeling everything and we have to prove the performance of it, then it's not just checking things off of a checklist, but it's implementing these items because they affect performance.
Right.
And that's what Passive House really does. Another question. Hi, Corey, what's your perspective on how well the framework for design excellence is being implemented and what might be the next best efforts for COAT, both locally and nationally?
It's a good question. So my focus recently has been on better integration with design awards. And I think that it's already moving that direction pretty effectively. But we kind of need to combine sustainable design awards with more traditional design awards into a single thing, right? Further integrate sustainability and design. So I love to see that EUI is being asked for, other high performance building strategies being asked for, or even the narratives for the 10 measures are being asked for in typical design awards programs. So continuing that process, I'd love to get to a point where projects that are like obviously not performing well no longer receive design awards. And I think that'll really that could be the trigger that like leads to this firm-wide cultural improvement. So that would be a good focus area.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, Corey was also instrumental in helping us with the design awards at AIA Colorado get the sustainability award up and running, and the spreadsheet that we have that we ask projects to fill out was also
Colorado has been a real
Corey.
leader, so it's super exciting.
Yeah. Another question, including modeling daylight or energy through basic architectural fees / services / process, or as a consultant or an ad service. Maybe I missed.
Is that a question?
Is
that
Brian,
whether
maybe
or not
do you
to
want
include?
to elaborate on this one? Yeah, maybe
Sure,
like, do
if
you
you can
include all
hear
of
me okay.
these? Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I was just curious of Corey, your firm's process. Are you integrating the modeling services as your own basic process? You're not going to charge for it necessarily. You're just going to do it as part of what you.
Yeah, and I think it's
incorporate.
a tough question, and I think we've landed on that answer, where if we think daylight is important to achieve the design that we want, we just need to do the daylight modeling. It's hard to make the case to a client like, Do you want a subpar building? And then you want to pay for additional modeling so we can make it a good building? But at the same time, like it is an added skill set. It is a value add. It would be great to be able to charge more for that. But it's a real communication challenge. But like if they don't choose to pay for that, then what do you do at that point?
Right.
So for the most part, we do kind of more daylight than energy, but daylight modeling is part of our typical process. And if we identify something that's especially challenging, we might propose researching that as an added fee.
And I might even add on to that and just say for embodied carbon modeling for a whole building life cycle analysis, or even if you're focusing just on one component of a building, is that something that you do as a additional service, or is that included in your basic architectural service fees?
For embodied carbon analysis, if the client is especially excited about embodied carbon, like let's say it's a university that has like public goals around carbon reduction, we will suggest embodied carbon analysis as an ad service. But if the client says no, we might end up doing it anyway internally because it's important to us and just not share those results.
Let's see, Brandon Kellogg, do you have a question you want to share?
Yeah, I was just typing it up, but basically revisiting cost and how to look at it, especially when you get down to a smaller scale project like a residential project. There's no denying that it does cost more upfront. There's, you know, a larger effort put into design and then equipment and building envelope. And I understand the mindset that this is all, you know, something that you pay up front and you get back through the life of the building. So thinking about it as a life cycle cost. Unfortunately, it seems that there is a mismatch between that and market valuations of property. So if you have a home for sale that's passive house certified next to a home for sale that is not, the actual value of the house does not reflect the better performance. So I'm wondering if you know of any mechanisms that make an effort to try and level this playing field, like changing the appraised value or different financing models, stuff like that could really help bring these kind of like design ideas to the masses.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, stepping way back, it's a real challenge what you're describing. Because you're right, we all see the passive house building as being inherently superior to the non-passive house, let's just say the whatever norm kind of typical building next door. But why is it that the public doesn't respond to that? And why does the public not value the improvement, right? It's improvement in comfort, it's improvement of air quality, it's improvement in durability, improvement in kind of energy performance, obviously. And I would say, like, at a very high level, it's the architecture profession that has not been effective at communicating the value that we can provide through better design to the general public. So that the general public sees these two buildings and they don't know what questions to ask. People are kind of so used to typical buildings that they can't even imagine what an improvement in thermal comfort would be. It's like, what does that even mean to like everyday homeowners? So not a specific solution that we can apply right now, but I will say as a profession, we really need to do a better job at communicating our value. This is something that maybe the AIA National, I know they've thought about this. I don't know how effectively they're actually working towards this. But it is an industry-wide issue about kind of communication and added value. So I don't have some like magic bullet for your question. But it's something that all of us can kind of just start working towards when we think about how we describe what we're doing and the values that we're providing through design.
Sure, thank you.
All right, I think we got through all the questions that are in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions that they want to ask Corey before we wrap up? Okay, I will give a plug for some of our upcoming AIA Committee on the Environment sessions. This is our first educational session. We've been so excited to have Corey here. Our next one coming up on April 17th, Passive House and Passive House Systems, focusing on some multifamily projects. Another one, May 14th, focusing on embodied carbon and full building life cycle analyses. And finally, our fourth one in June, TBD if that's going to be on the 11th, stay tuned, but that one will be focused on materials and healthy building materials. So we are so excited to have this 4-part series for all of you. The Committee on the Environment has worked really hard to try to think of all of these things that we want answers to and try to share that with the Colorado AIA community. Corey, again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your book, and for joining us today for our first session. It's been fantastic. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you in a month for the next one.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.